All right, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Wednesday, September 10th, and yeah, how crazy is this Doha attack? Israel bombs Qatar, one of the closest allies to the U.S. in the Middle East.
Yeah, well, in some ways, hey, it's typical. It's part of a pattern that we've been observing. Decapitation strikes. In this case, an attempted decapitation strike. It appears to have failed, um, and also attacks on negotiators. Anybody who's feigning surprise, how could Israel actually attack the negotiators that are, trying to reach a ceasefire, which should be of great importance to Israel, certainly is of great importance to the majority of Israeli citizens. Well, this is what Israel's been doing for a long time and has done, this is at least the third occasion I can think of since October 7th. They'd done it prior to that, but there was a Hamas negotiator that was assassinated in Beirut. Okay, there was Hania, as we all know, in Tehran. And then there was this. And they did manage, I think, to kill at least one of the negotiators, one of the members of the negotiating team. They were not just negotiators, but they were there specifically to discuss a proposal, that had been put forward by um, President Trump. Trump claimed that the Israelis had completely agreed with it. I saw some statement from Netanyahu, or from his administration that, maybe, maybe not. But anyway, that's the way that Trump was presenting it. And they um, essentially, Trump said, the ball's in your court. You better agree to this, or there'll be hell to pay. Or words to that effect. He said that just a couple of days ago, a very few days ago, and while they were getting together in Qatar, which is a place where they have, an office, and it was an office that was actually established at the request of the U.S. Right there in Qatar, Israel attacked and fired 10 missiles, from that struck this building. I believe they killed a total of 5 people. I think including the son of one of the senior Hamas officials, a negotiator, two Qatari security officials, and then a fifth person whose identity escapes me right now. But immediately afterwards, the IDF claimed that they had actually wiped out the entire Hamas political leadership there in Qatar. But that appears not to be true. Later the denial started to come in from different news sources. So it appears that they failed to do that. But they did strike the offices. They did kill at least one of the negotiators and a son of another. Now, for this to have occurred, there simply had to be coordination with the U.S. And there was Israeli officials have actually come out and said that. Netanyahu himself denied it. He made some sort of statement, this was entirely our doing, et cetera, et cetera. But it's just not believable. It's not possible that they did it without U.S. approval and actual coordination. The planes had to fly across Jordanian, Syrian, Iraqi, and I believe Saudi Arabian airspace. Are they,
Were they refueled?
and they were, according to, at least there was, there are these different platforms that keep track of different planes around the world, and they actually, this platform identified a British air refueling, tanker that was that took off shortly, before the airplanes arrived there, and then circled in the area just prior to the attack. So it looks like, the British were involved too, and they were refueled. And then again, this, Doha, where the office was, the capital of Qatar, is only 19 miles from a major U.S. air base. And so just don't tell me, it's just not possible that the Israelis did it. Now
You mean the
there was
U.S. didn't know?
yeah, the U.S. didn't know, and that the Israelis and that the U.S.
Right.
more than that coordinated with this. They just had to. There was no air defense was activated. They had to actually. You had to inform all these nations that okay, these planes are going to be traveling through your airspace, et cetera, et cetera. This was a multinational project, and the British, apparently were involved as well. Now, there was a report that came out in the Wall Street Journal that said that it was also approved by Qatar itself. And now the emir there has vociferously, denied that, has denounced the Israeli attack and said they didn't get any warning until the attack had already begun. He described it as treacherous, and the U.S. role is treacherous too. And seems like, very, very heated and, to all appearances, a sincere denial. But I strongly suspect that they did, like the Wall Street Journal said, they did in fact approve of this. I don't think it's possible that they could not, that as an Israeli journalist pointed out, it's just not, again, believable that the U.S. would carry this out or allow this, work with Israel to carry this out without getting Qatari approval, because, the U.S. has a lot invested in Qatar. They have that huge air base, the Al Udeid air base, very close to Doha, a major air base with thousands of personnel on it. And of course, Qatar is one of those Gulf states that committed to huge amounts of investment in the U.S., I think $1.4 trillion. And they had just recently, committed specifically to upgrading that airbase, to the tune of $1.8 billion. They did that like 6 weeks ago. I mean, Qatar is a very important ally of the U.S., and I just do not believe that they would have risked that relationship. Now, we'll see. If, their words are cheap, and I think like the emir has to pretend like he's outraged, just because, again, he has to take into account popular sentiment in the region. But if he doesn't do anything, and like they go ahead with the upgrade and the air base stays there and everything, I think we can know that, yeah, this was prearranged and Qatar was part of that arrangement.
It's hard to believe that Qatar could be part of it. How could you allow an attack on your own country? Like, what benefit why would they do that? Just because they're afraid of the United States, or there's just some influence?
There may have been some bargaining. Okay, yeah, we don't want to do this, but if you promise to do this for us or whatever, who knows what happened behind closed doors. Again, there were 2 Qatari security officials that were killed, but it was an attack on Hamas. And there had been signs that, like, Qatar had been more or less supportive of Hamas in the past, had been, in fact, a supporter, but that they were beginning to sour on them and beginning to pressure them to simply to cave in. So it may decide, well, these guys are just a nuisance now. We want to get rid of them. The Israelis have come forward with this plan to get rid of them. Let's just let it happen and then pretend like we're outraged. I mean,
I don't know.
That's really despicable.
It's hard to believe for me. I don't.
Unfortunately, I can believe it. I just, we talk a lot of, the genocidal Israelis and the complicit Americans, but part of the reason, as we pointed out too, is that you have these really two-faced, despicable, Arab leaders who obviously just don't give a damn about the genocide and, really even the interests of, of the Arabs or the Muslims or anything like that. It's about their own wealth,
Yeah,
their own power.
But I mean, you're putting so much at risk. Like you said, this is the largest U.S. air base in the region. Al Udeid Air Base has over 10,000 personnel on it. Qatar, the Emir just gifted Trump a $400 million luxury Boeing jet. They just agreed to a $1.5 trillion investment deal. This is, and it's clear that Trump really likes Qatar. He likes the Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar. We saw him on that tour. He loved it. All smiles. They made him feel like a king, a prince. It feels like this relationship was supposed to be solid.
Right.
And
well, maybe it is. That's what I'm saying, that it is. And it was just something they worked out between them. You know,
Yeah, but I mean, what would be the advantage for the United States or Qatar? It's only for Israel, right? It's only what Israel
right.
wants, and even then, it's like, how does this really advance Israel's goal and position,
Well,
anyways? Even
okay.
if
Well, I think it clearly what it does is it advances Netanyahu's, because we just talked about it. I think, you know, in the last episode we got into this. He just said, okay, the majority of Israeli society wants a ceasefire, but Netanyahu doesn't. It's a really problematic for him. You know, again, his coalition can fall apart. And so he's been fighting it, but he's under a lot of pressure. Again, the majority of voters do not want, you know, want to see the ceasefire. So, you know, what do? You go after the negotiators. You kill them. And now one
right,
thing
but
is like Qatar has now declared that they're no longer going to be mediate, you know, ceasefire talks.
right, but I mean, I'm talking about the U.S. and Qatar themselves. Like, why
Yeah.
would they
Okay. Well,
put
the
them?
U.S., we know, unfortunately, it's just, you know, it's the power of the Zionists within the U.S. It is not, I agree, it's not in the U.S. interest. But that's why I think Qatar must have agreed to it, because the U.S. would not risk that relationship. So they had to make sure, you know, okay, because Qatar, you know, this is what they're thinking about. Can you go along with this? You know, we'll cover for you or whatever, and maybe we're going to sweeten some deal that we, you know, we had on the table earlier. Um, I think it's clear. I don't think the U.S. would have risked it. You know, they probably, like the first times the Israelis brought it up, they say, hey, oh, we can't do that. And then the Israelis, they have a lot of contacts. This is the weird thing, too, is that they actually have a lot of contacts with Qatar. There's, in fact, some scandals going on right now about, you know, aides of Netanyahu that had these deals in very close relationship with Qatari government officials after October 7th. So, you know, the Israelis, they say, hey, you know, we get the sense that Qatar actually is kind of sick of Hamas and wants to get rid of them. They might be willing to go along with this. But we have to make sure to pretend that they're not part of it. And I think that's what happened. I mean, really, again, we'll see if Qatar actually does something substantive, you know, closes the base, you know, that would be huge. Then we say, okay, yeah, they were not informed. And that would just be like just a monumental error on the part of the U.S. I mean, I think it's an error anyway, but it's just, I doubt that they were willing to risk their relationship with Qatar. So I think that there was something worked out ahead of time.
Okay, yeah, we'll see. I mean, the only way, I guess we'll just have to see the way the Qatar responds, like you said, if they do close the airbase, because they said, you know, we reserve the right to retaliate. And I was like, oh boy, could this actually happen? And there's kind of just a call, like, for all countries in the Middle East that we need to band together. I mean, Israel's bombed a half dozen countries in a week. It's insane. Right. It's just so out of control.
Yeah, and including Tunisia, North Africa.
Right, right. So it's just, you know, they're spanning multiple continents now. You know, it's like, how far will they go? Somebody has to stop them. And I was thinking that maybe this would be the part where we start to push things over the edge. But you feel like Qatar, the emir, is complicit in this, the government as well. And it just, the corruption runs so deep. It's so rotten.
Right, but it still is shocking. I think, you know, there were a lot of condemnations from European countries, and I think they were probably real. I don't think they like this, and it is yet another red line that Israel has crossed. You know, they've done these decapitation strikes, but this is the first time in a neutral country that they've actually carried one out, and so that's just another, you know, further proof of increasing recklessness on the part of the Israelis. Just they just seem to, they won't recognize any boundaries.
But won't the people of Qatar, and you think the region, isn't their blood boiling? Don't they want, I mean, there were more Qataris killed than Palestinians, than Hamas, negotiators. You know, so aren't they upset? This was, you just bombed their capital. Yeah. Like, imagine if you know, Washington D.C. just got rocked by a missile. How crazy that would be. I mean, Doha is a big capital. You know, again,
you know, one thing is like these Persian Gulf states, they're extremely wealthy, and in a way, I think like the actual citizens of the state tend to be sort of part of the ruling class. They enjoy the riches, and then you have almost, not exactly a slave class, but just imported laborers that actually do the work in these countries. That take out the trash, that pick up the trash and clean the rooms and serve food in the restaurants and so on. It's not actually, and those people are just powerless. So. Yeah, I don't know that there's really any risk of some sort of uprising within Qatar. There'd just be a great deal of anger in the region, I think, clearly. Um,
Well, okay,
so,
here's just another thing. I know the U.S. It offers security guarantees to like half the globe, like 50 nations have some type of security arrangement with the United States. I thought Qatar did as well, and that's part of the reason they have that base is for the
yeah,
protection. Plus, they have all this
right.
military equipment, all the Patriots, all these things. Like
Yeah.
you have
And none of them were
outsourced.
activated. Right.
Right. So like, what is this security guarantee if a nation like Israel can just bomb you and not everything
Yeah.
gets shut down? That's a
Right.
huge question, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
everybody's around the globe is like, why weren't these activated? Were they shut down by the U.S.? Who's operating them? Was there an order given? I mean, do they not work? I mean,
Yeah.
like,
Right.
well,
Well,
what's the point of having the U.S. guarantee your security if they don't protect you?
Yeah. Well, Trump came out with a statement. It was really a wishy-washy sort of statement. Like he did not
Let me
approve of this. You can
Yeah,
maybe you have it.
I have parts of it, and because I was wanting to address it because it is an interesting statement. It's weird how he kind of goes all over. Actually, I think this was from Caroline Levitt during the press conference.
Okay, but he said something very similar to what she said. Yeah.
Right. It said this morning the Trump administration was notified by the United States military, so the U.S. military notified them that Israel was attacking Hamas, which very unfortunately was located in a section of Doha, the capital of Qatar. But, okay, eliminating Hamas is a worthy goal, and this incident could be an opportunity for peace, is what they say. It's so crazy. The president views Qatar as a strong ally and friend of the United States and feels very badly about the location of this attack. Oops, sorry, it's just a bad location. But it's strange because he said notified by the U.S. military. It's almost like Trump is saying we didn't know. And part of me is like, maybe that's the case. Like Israel just does stuff, and the military and the CIA and Mossad are kind of all one, and they operate. And we saw this in his first term with Syria. He said to withdraw, and the Pentagon general said, "We just do our own thing. We just ignore them." So they begin this activity, and then Trump learns with it, and then he just sort of does what he always does, which is just free ball it while it's happening.
Yeah. I believe he did give an approval to this. He had knowledge, beforehand.
What a scumbag! It's
Yeah,
crazy.
but he was, this has been the case for the last few months at least. That he's giving unconditional support to the Israeli government, to whatever they want to do, and so this is just not a surprise. And again, this is something. It's not. This was something that was coordinated. Like again, the planes flew over several nations. All those nations had to be, informed ahead of time, and there had to be handovers, and there was the RAF tanker. This was something that was planned.
Let's see if that's
the
confirmed.
US
If
we'll see.
the RAF is confirmed. I did see that on somewhere on X,
Right.
but like I'm not. I don't know how.
Right. Well, I kind of I remember there was something similar, like in the case of the Bulgarian. There are these unofficial tracking groups because the data is out there and they collate it and they provide the maps. And it turned out what they said about the plane over Bulgaria with von der Leyen on it, they proved that she was lying, and the Bulgarian government actually backed it up. They said, yeah. So their track record has been good. I can think of other instances where they, but I don't. But you're right, it isn't confirmed. So let's kind of push that to the side. I wouldn't be surprised at all, but it's hard to believe that they just made it up. But let's wait till it's confirmed. But even absent the any involvement by the RAF, we just know these other countries had to be involved, and I think the U.S. simply had to be involved too.
That's nuts. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is four times now that Trump has used the pretext of negotiations to carry out some type of heinous assassination or decapitation strike.
or
Now, I mean,
to allow the
or
to
allow the
enable the
Israelis
Israelis to do
yeah,
it. Right. I
as a
can think
cover.
of right. I can think of three at least, but maybe there's a fourth.
Well, okay, so this is what I'm thinking. There's
Yeah.
Soleimani in his first term, where he
Oh,
was
okay.
lured to Baghdad for, from my understanding, what he was supposed to go. He was
Engage in peace talks, right?
engaged in peace talks in Baghdad, and that's when they killed him.
Yeah.
You know, so Soleimani. There's Nasrallah. I had a clip that I played when that first happened, where they're talking to the reporter and saying, "Yeah, there was this peace deal that you guys were signing to end the
Or
the
ceasefire
invasion
offer, right?
ceasefire officer in southern Lebanon." And that's why Nasrallah moved to a more open location, and they killed him. And then, of course, the most famous one is the Red Wedding attack in Iran, the real heinous
Okay.
one where engaged, and now this one. So that's
Yeah.
four under Trump. It's
Right.
like
Yeah.
you can't.
That's true. That's
Right. So and then on top of that, you have Israel carrying out decapitation strikes. Striking a consulate in Syria. Killing the Yemeni prime minister and his cabinet in Yemen just a couple of weeks ago. Now the U.S. is talking about the potential decapitation strikes against Maduro. It's just like this is it's there's no semblance of engaging in any type of rules of war, international order anymore, any rules. It's just a free for all now. It feels
right.
like.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing that I think Trump has done. If you want to say one service that he's provided, is that he's ripped the mask off. The rules based international order was always phony, but maybe not entirely so. There were we sometimes observed the rules and made an effort to appear to observe certain rules, to be within, to comply with international law. Though, yeah, when it suited us. And then when we broke, the rules or we violated international law, there was always an excuse, it often using the language of human rights or something like that. So by doing that, it was false. But there actually were certain constraints. There was an effort to at least keep up the appearance, but now that's gone. It kind of reminds me again of there was a very important, I can't remember the emperor, but after the fall of the Republic, the Roman Republic, that actually a lot of the institutions of the Republic remained, but they just were, especially over time, they just were stripped of all, of any real authority or power. But still, there was this pretense. We have senators, and they get together, and they rubber stamp what the emperor says, and then it's one emperor just just forget about this. What's this? What's the point of this? And Trump is kind of like that emperor, and in a way, he's done us a service. Again, it's not the Department of Defense; it's the Department of War. Yeah, well, that's true. There hasn't been really a defense aspect to almost anything we've done for a long, long time. It is all about war. So. Yeah,
Well,
it's
where's the pushback then? Like if the mask is off and everybody sees that this is there is no rules based international order. It's just that the Israel and the United States can kill whoever they want, bomb whoever they want, and there's no repercussions. With the backdrop of a genocide being live streamed to us from Gaza, like. We were talking about this in the last episode. When is it going to reach a boiling point or breaking point? It's just like I feel like there has to be a reaction.
right.
It's just such a slow moving.
Yeah.
I know
Well,
public opinion has changed, and there's some sanctions
right.
and talk about recognizing Palestine as a state. But
Right.
let's see some real
Yeah.
pushback.
Right. Well, I think the shifts in public opinion are very significant, but it takes years, maybe even decades, for that to play out. I think eventually we will, but again, we're talking mainly about the younger generation, but all the institutions are, firmly in the Zionist camp, and they're just not going to change in the short run. Maybe not the medium term either. Regionally, again, we have these very corrupt Arab leaders. Unfortunately, there's a lot of anger among the people. But that's just not reflected. Again, it's somewhat analogous to what we're talking about in Western Europe. There is anger among the people, and there are real protests. Some people are really putting their freedom on the line anyway, like in Britain, where they're going out and holding signs showing, that they support, what is it, Palestinian action, and
Yeah,
getting
how's it?
roughed up and thrown in jail.
That's crazy. Yeah, I've been seeing
Yeah,
the videos of that. It's nuts. They say they're
right.
terrorists, but he's
Yeah,
saying, just saying like I support Palestine action, and the genocide. Like, oh, you're a terrorist, and they're grabbing like 80-year-old people in
yeah,
wheelchairs and arresting them.
right,
You know,
right. Yeah. So anyway, that's just what we're going to say. And I think eventually something will crack. But again, as long as the institutions are firmly under Zionist control, and they are, it's just it can go on for a while like this, and I don't think it can go on forever. It can't go on forever. It can't go on for like I think more than another generation at the most. But and that's pushing it. Maybe it'll be much sooner than that. I certainly hope so. But certainly in the short term, I don't think we can expect to see any change. And regionally, it's the same thing. You have these very corrupt leaders in the Arab world, unfortunately. Again, it may be there was some point where it just cracks. When people have been pointing to Egypt, I think the Egyptian authorities. Yeah, they've been very corrupt. They've been complicit in a lot of ways. They have this deal with Israel, that goes back to the Anwar Sadat and that deal between Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. Way back in the, was it actually the 1970s? I believe it was. But it's under strain. The Israelis are violating it. The Israelis want, I think, to push, and they may actually attempt to just push the surviving Gazans into Egyptian territory. And the Egyptians do have a real army, funded by the U.S., so it can't fight for very long because the U.S. has control over the parts and the maintenance and all that. But they can actually fight for a while. And I think there's a lot of anger in Egypt, and there have been, a certain amount of civil disobedience in support of the Palestinians there. And you have a regime that is trying to keep that under control, but at the same time is itself, increasingly, angry at the Israeli government. And something could blow there, but who knows? Who knows? These things are very hard to predict. It's just really globally, it's where we see the biggest consequences. The SCO and BRICS, and the change in orientation of India and so on. That's all very significant, but that's not within the region, and unfortunately, it doesn't. At least at this point, it's not going to be a direct help to the Gazans.
so you don't expect there to be any real huge fallout from this, the attack on Doha, or do you think there might be some lip service,
yeah,
but Qatar is involved and they're going to just not do anything and nothing happens? And
I'm afraid so. It's just like it's another. It's shocking, and I think it's even shocking for like a lot of the Europeans. And it is just a kind of another demonstration of what Israel has become. And it's just part of this process of, it's contribute to this process of just waking up the world to the real insanity of and genocidal nature of this regime in Israel. But it's just one other milestone among other milestones, on this.
well, I hope you're
road.
wrong. I mean, I was.
I do too.
Maybe it's because I've been waiting for almost 2 years now. Ever since October 7th, and seeing what's been unfolding before our eyes. Is okay. Who's going to stop this? When is there going to be an uprising, a breaking point? And just seeing it, and also just. It's just crazy to me that the amount of Zionist control over Western institutions has been made so apparent that even people that don't care about foreign policy and what's going on in the Middle East, they're aware there's something wrong here. And it's just so apparent now. And it's just the elephant's there in the room, and we just keep on dancing around it. It's like we all know what's going on here. And it just blows my mind that it just keeps on happening. This genocide keeps on unfolding. Israel has control over our politicians, over Western institutions, over the media, and they just keep on doing these things. And not only are Western institutions, captured, but apparently much of the Middle East has been corrupted under the spell, or I don't know if it's fear. It's yeah. I mean, I don't know if you saw this. Did you see that Iran is opening up now, like signing some deal with the IAEA again?
Yeah.
After everything that happened,
Right.
they're going in. I don't know if it's because they're scared of the snapback sanctions, but like, who cares? They're sanctioned out the wazoo. I just can't believe that after all this stuff, killing negotiators, sneak attacks, people still try to work with the U.S. Even with Israel just being this rabid attack dog that's just going around biting everybody in the region.
Yeah. No, I was actually kind of shocked by that. I saw the headline that they were going to sign this memorandum, the foreign minister, Arakchi, and Grossi, the infamous Grossi, who just couldn't bring himself to actually condemn the Israeli attacks on these nuclear facilities or the assassination of nuclear scientists. He just came out with these very vague, mealy-mouthed statements. I know the Iranians were furious, and the Russians were too. They've had their own experience of him. I was hoping to see him go, and it seemed like that you would have to demand that, because it was such I think, egregious violation of really the spirit and, the very purpose of the IAEA. But they did make this agreement. Now, like the initial reports, I said that, they're going to let the inspectors back in, and they would tell them where all the enriched uranium was. And then which just seemed to me like a real capitulation on the part of Iran. Then this morning I saw a report. It was actually a statement by Arakchi himself, and said that, okay, they have agreed to reestablish, the relationship with the IAEA. They have not agreed to let the inspectors in yet, and there will be negotiations about what the inspectors will be allowed to see, and and the scope and the form of their inspections. So, maybe, and they also said that if, part of the deal is that the snapback sanctions cannot be put into effect. If they are, then this memorandum is null and void. So, maybe, maybe the Iranians are going to drive a hard bargain and are just going to and ensure, but I just see, like, I don't think you can trust them. We're just talking about all these treacherous, this clear use of of diplomacy, negotiations, and international institutions to attack these countries. So I think it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that it was a foolish move, and it makes me, I think if Raisi was still president of Iran and he hadn't died in that helicopter crash, that we would be seeing something very different. I think that you would see a much more confident and realistic Iran. I think it's just Pezeshkian. I don't, I'm not implying that he's actually treacherous or, but I think he's just weak and naive. I think that's just his nature. Maybe he was a great doctor, but he shouldn't be president of this country in wartime.
Yeah, I mean, you think that clearly the lesson to be learned here after all this is don't enter into any type of negotiation or agreement with the West. I mean, we just talked about Trump using negotiations and peace talks to give Israel an opportunity to assassinate people. And he did that 4 times, include 2 of them with Iran, Soleimani, and then the attack on Iran. And then that's just Trump here in the Middle East, and then we have all the deals with Russia, Minsk 1 and 2 and Istanbul. It's just the lesson to be learned is that they will backstab you and they will lie to you, just guaranteed 100%. So don't, you drive a hard bargain. The goal is don't drive a bargain. You can't, that's the lesson we learned is you don't try to bargain or negotiate or pretend, because if they do give you something that feels like you maybe got a somewhat good deal, then it's a ruse. Even if it's not, it's probably a ruse. Mm-hmm. It's always been a ruse. Everything's a ruse. They just do what they want to do.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was even true, the JCPOA, that was finally agreed to. it's
Right, there we go.
the
Just
West
right,
never kept
another
their
one.
part of the bargain. Of course, actually from day one, they were supposed to start lifting sanctions, and instead they imposed new ones, even under Obama. And then, of course, Trump tore it up, and then the Europeans were supposed to stick with it, and they didn't. They actually just complied with the sanctions, and then finally, when Iran was basically the only member that was still abiding by it, and eventually they started to pull out gradually. It's like we're kind of waiting for you to come back to this. And now, the Europeans get together and declare that, okay, Iran's in violation. It's just so absurd. There's just there's such an arrogance and just a complete lack. It is some form of supremacist thinking. It's just like basically we can do what you want and everyone else must comply. This is, and it's just beyond blatant. I think anybody that with any sort of objectivity just can see it, and that means most of the world. It's just that people, it's just the West, the elite classes, the political class, the media class in the West, they can't because they're blinded by their own sense of superiority.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess I don't know. I'm surprised if Qatar really was in on this. I hope something. I hope that's not true, and I hope there's a response. Because Qatar did say that we reserve the right to retaliate. I feel like maybe they just had to say that, and then I think on mainstream television they released some broadcasts showing the might of the Qatari military, as if they're preparing for something. But yeah, maybe it's all theater, I guess. Maybe we'll see.
It is. Yeah, I hope I'm wrong. There's a chance I'm wrong, but I strongly suspect that it is just theater. And if they don't do anything substantive, we know that it is.
So what something substantive would be either a retaliation or closing down the Al-Udeid air base, maybe destroying that ripping up that 1.5 trillion dollar investment deal. Also, what about the Abrams Accords? Is there a chance that the Abrams Accord was to normalize with Israel, and Israel's attacking us? This accord is kaput.
Well, I think Qatar hasn't actually acceded to that yet, but I think was maybe on the verge. It's like one of those countries that could join it. The countries that have joined it in the region are Bahrain and UAE. And then I think out like in North Africa, we have Sudan and Morocco. Those are the four, Muslim countries that have joined the Abrams Accords, but not Qatar. Now, there's a possibility. UAE already expressed its displeasure about what was going on in the West Bank, right? And they can't be happy because they themselves have a very large base. I think the largest base in the UAE is a naval base, if I'm remembering correctly. But they, have very close ties to the U.S. too, military ties to the U.S. And then, you would think that they wouldn't be pleased about it, but we'll see. I think they probably will remain, as a partner to Israel. They'll remain within the Abraham Accords.
I mean, do you think Trump is happy with what Netanyahu is doing in the region? He can't be, right?
Yeah, well, I don't know. To be honest, sometimes he says things that are we even going so far as to release that Jeffrey Sachs video, right? It makes you wonder. And but then he says the opposite thing, and he promises that there will be hell to pay, and he seems to. He has his moments, where maybe his eyes are open to the suffering, and it actually does affect him on some level. And he says something because he's not a very disciplined person. But then he also seems to share in the Israeli bloodlust. I think he maybe revels in in these attacks.
Yeah, maybe, or maybe it's maybe it's just blackmail and it's compromise. And he's scared, so he just lets Netanyahu do what he wants. It just doesn't make sense to me. This is so contrary to American interests. Everything that we're doing here, we're putting all those 10,000 American soldiers that are on the Al-Udeid air base. You're putting those people in danger too. This thing could break into a wider regional conflict. All of our soldiers over there in the Middle East are going to be sitting ducks.
Yeah, well, unless you worked out something in advance, I think maybe they worried about it, but I think
Yeah,
they
well, these
probably
things
that's
can go
another reason to
sideways.
believe. And the fact is that yeah, it doesn't make sense. It's really not in U.S. interest, but that's been true for decades. Long before Trump. It's just become after October 7th, and then Trump. It's kind of risen to a whole other level. Israeli recklessness has grown, and the nature of the obvious complicity of the U.S. in its crimes has become that much more obvious. But it was always there, and it's been there for decades.
Okay. All right. Well, we can move over. Just Qatar, please stand up. Don't just let Israel bomb you, and then it's so
Yeah,
crazy. I
right.
just and the same thing with the U.S. Kick us out of there. I don't want us to be there. Get out of it. We should bring everybody home. This is
Right.
ridiculous.
Well, let's say, just one thing I want to mention. There's this flotilla of 50 boats headed towards Gaza, and they made a stop in Tunisia. And
Right.
apparently, while there, off the coast of Tunisia, one of the boats was struck by a drone. It had to be an Israeli drone. I think it's a fair assumption. I guess we can't prove it, but I think it's a fair assumption. Um, and Greta Thunberg wasn't on the boat at the time, but apparently she had been on it earlier. So it makes you wonder if there was actually an attempted assassination. I mean, I wouldn't put anything past them at this point.
Right.
Really.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. It's just they're so out of control, and it's just insane that the U.S. is not only covering for it, we're financing it. It's just, it's sick. It's really sickening. Okay, well, where do we want to go? I mean, apparently Nepal's blowing up now. Ukraine is collapsing. I heard the French government collapsed. Although I hear these terms like, I remember a year ago the Schultz's government collapsed, and I saw on the news like, oh, it collapsed, but I felt like nothing really changed. So I just feel like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
fancy language. It's like I don't know the
Right,
politics in
right,
Europe. They don't have any power anyways. So
right.
I
Yeah,
don't know if
it's,
that's
his particular government, but all the institutions are still there, and there are ways of addressing the crisis. And probably what Macron is going to do is appoint a new prime minister and just, kind of kick the can down the road. And eventually it looks like there's a very good chance that the National Rally will take power. I guess they simply have been, their popularity has been increasing steadily under Macron. Macron's popularity is down to 15%, which
it's
apparently is better
amazing.
than,
That's that high.
yeah, better than Starmer's. But not as quite as good as Mertz's. Mertz's is also very low. But yeah, anyway. So yeah, it's not a real collapse in the sense that the Soviet Union collapsed. We're talking about it just a total collapse of the system. The system's still very much in place, and it will continue.
Okay,
But there
well, we
is a
don't have to.
crisis.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll just kind of monitor it until it gets
Yeah,
more interesting than everything else that's happening.
yeah. There's so much going on, right?
Right. So, well, is there any updates with the Venezuela and Maduro? I mean, it looked like I saw a bunch of videos on X of like Pete Hegseth talking to sailors on Navy vessels there and saying like, this is not a drill, this is a real thing. We got to, this is people that are poisoning American citizens. You're defending the homeland. It sounded like, right, just a prep talk before some of type of attack or an invasion. And now I'm just waiting for it to happen. Do you think it's
Yeah,
actually going to happen?
I think so. Maybe not. Maybe if they just kind of play with them and kind of they're putting pressure on them and figure they're probably hoping that with all this pressure, like that's something, maybe they have some reason to believe there's some sort of group within Venezuela that they have established contact with. And they're hoping that, like they'll go for the $50 million bounty or something. Um, so they may stay off. I think that would be the ideal solution for them. And perhaps that's what this is about. It's creating the pressure and maybe just, and then they hope that, this will just cause Venezuela to implode or a coup to take place. But there's no guarantee of that. And I think over time there will be, a lot of people are saying, like, what the heck are you doing? And I thought you were a tough guy, they'll get these criticisms from the hawks, and Trump will, I think, may very well move in to carry out some kind of strike anyway.
And we think a decapitation type of strike that's what all
It
we
could
could
very
really
well,
do, right?
I think it's, like I said, among us within a certain sector of the U.S. population, there's a certain envy of Israel. And Israel gets to do these things. Israel gets to take the gloves off. Why do we have to be so restrained and fight with one hand tied behind our back? Let's just, let's. Of course, it's not really true. You think about the shock and awe in Iraq. Again, a country that never attacked us or anything, but I think there is, we've seen, not just support and a refusal to condemn these Israeli actions, but you see people really celebrating it within the political class here in this country. So it may be that we just choose to emulate them. Say, yeah, we got to be like the Israelis. It's our problem in the past is that we're not tough. There are people that, not a really very small minority. I mean, that's kind of a fairly mainstream view. It's just that we've been too restrained. We've been too civilized, in essence, because we're fighting these monsters, and we just have to,
Right. Do you think that, do you think Israel wants us to, or they don't care what happens in this region? But part of me is just like, they want us to engage in these types of strikes because it brings them to their level. And then it kind of, it gives them some type of, right, exactly. It normalizes it. See, it's like, look, America does it. You do it too. We do it. It's just the way it goes. And then it's more ethical because we're not killing bombing Caracas and killing all the civilians. We just go for the leadership and cause turmoil. And then we do economic sanctions, starve 500,000 children, whatever, it's okay. I think that's what they're, I think they want to see us to continue this type of action. So even though it's not in their area of the world, they're like, yes, this is, normalizing our behavior of Israel. And it also just gives them cover to get away with more things. If the United States is now embroiled in a conflict here, people won't be paying as much close attention to Gaza. All of a sudden, the whole Western world is looking at, oh my God, what's happening in Venezuela? And now we can move faster and just... I don't know.
You may be right. I'm sure there are some people who are thinking that way within the Israeli government.
Right, because I just started to think like I almost feel like all of our actions by the U.S. Do I need to look at it through the lens of the Israelis? Because are the Israelis really largely in control of our intelligence agencies and our military, and do they have enough compromising material on enough key people that they can kind of orchestrate what they're doing, and they give themselves cover? I don't know. Maybe I'm going too far down that rabbit hole, but
right. Yeah, I think maybe to say like they actually control the Department of Defense is maybe going a little bit too far, but they have huge influence, and
Department of War.
Yeah, Department of War. I'm sorry. Right. But yeah, I mean the influence is huge and can hardly be exaggerated. Yeah. I think probably it would be, all in all, it would be regarded as beneficial to the Israelis, by the Israelis. The only thing is they wouldn't want the U.S. to expend too many missiles because they want them to be used in their own region.
This is just this whole thing. This whole thing's going to end with nukes, Dad. I feel like that's this is heading.
Yeah, well,
Israel's not going to stop. They're just not going to stop, and then eventually someone's going to punch back, and then they're going to cry and try to flip the table and say game over by pressing that nuke launch button.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think that's, unfortunately, too unlikely. I mean, that could happen.
Okay, well, we'll wait for that. In the meantime, can you give us an update on Ukraine? I haven't been paying as close attention, but I know there's been a lot going on. Based on my understanding is the Russians have said, no, we're basically done with trying to get a negotiated peace settlement. They realize that this isn't going to happen. So full steam ahead with military victory, right?
Yeah, well, they have increased the scale of their drone and missile attacks significantly. That's what's happened. So just the other day there was a attack that involved 810 drones. These are the I was about to say the Shahad, but the
Iran.
Iran drones. Yeah, it's just like
Right.
the West insists on calling them Shahad because they're based on drones that were supplied to is not Israel but to Russia in the very early months of the war, in the first year of the war, by Iran. And but they were, they were good, but the Russians kept on working on. Now they have something that's really a completely different beast. And to keep on insisting on calling them the Shahad, it's just propaganda. They now actually have jet engines and they can dive, and so on, a much larger payload. And this is something that we're seeing happen in this war. I mean, it's just that on both sides, drones have just gone through, like every 2 months they go through upgrades, and just and it's just a very, very rapid evolution of the technology on both sides in this war. So anyway, yeah, they have, there has been this qualitative increase, improvement in the drones, but there's also been a real scaling up of production, and now the Russians can send hundreds, of these Garand drones night after night, and recently they sent 810 in addition to about a dozen, missiles. And then just last night, they sent, I think, 500 drones. I'm not sure. No. I don't know. There were quite a large number, probably hundreds, but I don't know what the number of drones was. And more missiles, dozens of missiles. I don't know exactly what the number was. But the big news was that a certain number of these drones, according to the polls, 19, crossed over into Polish airspace, and
Oh,
that
right.
they shot down 3 of them. And so there's a huge to do about this in Europe. And,
Article 4 has been enacted.
yeah, Article 4, which is actually really doesn't mean a whole lot. It just means that Poland is going to consult with the other members of NATO. I know DD Geopolitics has described this as a group therapy session. I think that's pretty pretty good. So but it's if it's true, and in fact 19 crossed over into Polish airspace. It raises a number of questions. First of all, why did this happen? And I think it was actually the Belarusians that said that, yeah, they detected these planes. They said actually both Ukrainian and Russian drones, not planes, but drones, that had been kind of pushed off course by electronic warfare, EW, and that they crossed over Belarusian airspace and were heading into Poland. And they actually warned the Poles. They have some sort of arrangement with them, even though they're good, our adversaries. They do have this line of communication. They warn the Polish military, hey, that these drones are headed over towards your airspace.
Wait. Who warned the Polish?
Belarusians.
The Belarusians?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they said it was because of EW. There were these drones that were close to Polish airspace, and they got hit by EW, and they went off course and into Polish airspace. Now, in the past, this is not the first time that there have been drones. First of all, they're claiming we don't know for sure that they're Russian drones. I think there have been a couple of pictures. And actually, the ones that they've shown were not of Garans, but I think something called like the Geberi, which is not. It's basically it serves either as a decoy or as a reconnaissance drone, so it doesn't actually carry a warhead. The pictures I saw, maybe two pictures of these Geberi drones that looked like they had just landed, like they had just run out of fuel. So. So one question that raises, if there were 19 intrusions and they were only able to shoot down 3 when they were using, I guess, like the Dutch and the Polish Air Force, and they got their own air defense and whatever. They had all these, and there was another nation involved too. I forget which one it was, that they can only shoot down 3 drones out of 19. That kind of raises questions about their air defense. if in fact there were 19. Again, this is what they allege, this is what they claim, and it's probably true, but we don't know for sure. Now, why would there be so much? This has happened in the past. Occasionally, a drone goes off course and it ends up in Romanian airspace or Polish airspace. It's happened before, actually on several occasions in the past. But this time, why would there be so many? Assuming that the Polish claims are true. And I think the answer is that this was pointed out by a Swedish military analyst, actually, and I think his logic is impeccable. It's just the scale of these attacks has gone up so much that, whereas in the past, if you knocked off, 1% of the drones or 10% of them or something, that was only going to be 2 drones or so, but now, there are so many drones. And also I think the tactics have changed that sometimes these drones will fly in swarms or kind of in flocks together. So you could see how possibly there would be an EW burst that managed to hit one of these swarms, and then that could actually send 19 drones off, whereas in the past it just wasn't possible because there weren't enough drones in the sky close to the Polish border. But now sometimes it happens. And so this is the most, we'll see, maybe there will be some explanation that's even more convincing. But this is the most convincing explanation that I've heard so far. Now, of course, the Europeans are claiming, again, without any evidence, that this was intentional. Immediately, it was just like von der Leyen actually in a speech to the European Parliament claimed that, like she had heard it 15 minutes earlier. So how does she know? But of course, they immediately jump to that conclusion, and they use it. I think they just see it as a great chance to demonize Russia, to pressure the Americans to increase their support, to sabotage any chance for negotiations. It's the typical European approach, unfortunately. But you stop and think about it. It's like, why would the Russians send like these drones? Actually, apparently, a lot of them just ran out of fuel and crashed in Poland. They're completely harmless. Why would they send a number kind of drones randomly into Poland? What was the purpose? Surely the Russians understand what the Europeans were going to do. It doesn't benefit them anything. Just nothing at all. So I think it just had to be, if in fact these were Russian drones, that it just had to be an accident, again, the result probably of some sort of EW event.
Okay, well, I guess the big question is will they be able to use this to escalate in Ukraine? Because obviously that's what von der Leyen and a lot of the EU elite wanted. That's what they're excited about this. They're like, great. Okay, and I'm sure Zelensky's jumping up with joy, like, hurrah, maybe this is my Black Swan event. Time to put on the pressure. Let's see, Article 4, that's just one away from Article 5. We're pretty close, right? So let's...
Yeah. Well, it should be pointed out that just a few days ago, roughly a week ago, the former president of Poland, Duda, spoke about an event that took place in November of 2022. And I remember that quite well. It was, it was actually a Ukrainian air defense missile that, an S-300, I believe, that possibly an S-200, but but in any case, a Ukrainian air defense missile that flew into Polish airspace and struck and killed a Polish farmer.
Right.
And the Ukrainians immediately said that this is a Russian attack, an unprovoked attack on Poland, and, the NATO needs to invoke Article 5. But the president at that time said that he was under a lot of pressure from the Ukrainians to do just that, to declare this as an unprovoked attack by the Russians. But he didn't. And actually the Americans too, I just noticed it was that, generally if the Ukrainians make some sort of extravagant claim against the Russians, the Americans, no matter what, they don't need any evidence. They just back them up, like the so-called Bucha massacre or whatever. This is all, clearly the Russians did this. But in this case, actually, the Americans refused to, the Poles refused to, because they knew the game that Zelensky was playing and was trying to get him, to invoke Article 5. And they said, well, no, we don't want to do this. There was obviously resistance to that. We're not going to go to war with the Russians. But again, yeah, he's trying to do the same thing. He's trying to get them to actually become directly involved in the conflict. I think he came out with a statement. He said we need to have some sort of integrated air defense, and in other words, you'd have NATO planes shooting down Garans over, in Ukrainian airspace. It's like the beginning of some sort of no-fly zone, and that's what he was asking for. I don't think he's going to get it. This time they'll go to Article 4 and just they'll use it to. Not to, I think they understand at this point anyway, they can't send troops into Ukraine. They're just not going to get the American backing. It's too risky. But maybe it'll help to justify sending more long-range missiles to Ukraine. It will be used, again, to pressure the U.S. to increase its support. Where the U.S. seems to be starting to pull out somewhat. Maybe this will strengthen the people like the hands of people like Kellogg in the U.S. who really want to see a recommitment, a stronger commitment to Ukraine. I think that's what we'll see in the short term. They're going to milk it for all it's worth, but there won't be any direct intervention.
Well, what is the state of the air defense in Ukraine now? I mean, they're sending all these drones in. Are Ukraine able to shoot them down? Are we seeing the state of sort of have the U.S. and NATO military evolved? Their electronic warfare and
that's
anti-drone
kind of
defense systems.
Right. I am kind of surprised that there was, that could be a significant event if, in fact, it was EW that sent these drones off course. That indicates that there is some sort of effective EW within Ukraine. I hadn't seen evidence of that before, so that's something to consider. That may be the more significant aspect of this event, if in fact that was the cause of this event. Because in general, it looks like the Russians are hitting their targets, overwhelmingly hitting the designated targets, and with great precision. There was that strike a few days ago with 810 drones, and you can see the footage. There's, you can see them coming down one after another, and just very little evidence of any kind of air defense at all. So it seems like they're just, in general, they're completely exposed. So I would be curious to find out if this was EW, what was it? Is it they just managed to have something close to the Polish border, or that may be possible? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems crazy to me if the U.S., NATO doesn't have adequate air defense, that we are escalating all over the world. It's just these drones. If we can't shoot down these drones, then you're screwed, right? I mean, the drones in general
are
that's the easy target.
Right, exactly.
And so if they're mass producing these and they're getting through and you can't shoot them down, then I feel like it's just game over for a country. It's just, I just don't understand our strategy, our plan, why we want to stay in this conflict in Ukraine. And it's just so frustrating because in both of these, in the Middle East and the US, everybody knows this is not good for the United States. It's draining our resources. It's making us, morally bankrupt, militarily, financially bankrupt, and militarily weakened over time. And and we have all the cards. Trump has cards to play in Ukraine.
Yeah.
The intelligence, it's our generals in Germany that are directing Ukrainian troops. It's our weapons. Sure, maybe we're making the Europeans pay, but they're still ours. He has the ability to shut it down.
Yeah.
And the same thing in the Middle East. Attacking Tunisia, Syria, genocide in Gaza. Attacking Iran, Lebanon. It's just annexing the West Bank. The whole thing is insane. Bombing Doha. And none of this is horrible for the United States. And he has the ability. We're the only country that has leverage over Israel to stop this. This is our genocide too, and we could just end it. And it's just so crazy that we're not pulling any of these levers, not even saying like, hey, okay, ease up, or maybe, we'll slow down the aid, or, we won't be giving you the diplomatic cover, whatever it is. There's so many levers that we have to pull, but we don't pull any of them. And the question is why? Right. Why don't we play it? Why aren't we playing any of our cards? We can end all this horrible nonsense that's destroying our country, destroying our soft power, draining us economically, draining us just morally, militarily, everything. It's just, why?
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, again, we've talked about what's happening in the case of Israel, and I think you do have to point to the Israel lobby. Again, the thesis that was put forth by. Um,
And Epstein.
okay, well, I I don't know. Maybe I'll just say maybe on that. I'm agnostic on that question, but definitely the Israel lobby. That's clear. You don't have to have Epstein. Maybe Epstein's part of it. I'll acknowledge that. But even if we just Epstein never existed, we still have the Israel lobby, and it's very powerful. And again, that was a thesis put forth by Mearsheimer and Waltz, and it's just proven true. It's become increasingly obvious as time goes by that they have just outsized influence within Washington. And then it's not. I don't want to make it sound like, yeah, they're issuing orders. It's that we're willingly complicit. It's just like we have people that are have become avid Zionists within this country, and they don't really need to receive any orders from Israel. They they want to see Israel bomb places, and they want to emulate Israel. I mean, unfortunately, it's just like that's what we have. That's one matter. The question of the Middle East, and then we have. I think it's clear that there was some reluctance on the part of Trump and Vance. I think they actually would like to get out of this war in Ukraine, but there is this institutional commitment to doing that, and this reluctance to acknowledge limits to U.S. power. Now, there are some indications that at the edges anyway, we're beginning, even our Pentagon is beginning to acknowledge that maybe there are limits to U.S. military power. We got that. There was that statement like a couple of months ago that, hey, we can't supply any more Patriot, interceptors to Ukraine because we're out of them. And that led to all kinds of, hysteria and an outcry within the West. And then there was agreement, okay, we'll send them 17 or something like this. I can't remember what it was exactly, but it was clear that it seemed to be there wasn't any indication that that assessment that had been made that our stockpiles were dangerously low, okay, was not true. And clearly it is true. And the Pentagon has to know about it. And I think at some point, inevitably, it just has to affect their policy, regardless of what they want to do. And we are seeing indications that they are beginning to just reassess the whole U.S. approach to the globe, and maybe even really reassess the feasibility of U.S.-led global hegemony. There was I think it was Politico that leaked it, but there was a draft of the strategic, national defense strategy, a paper that had been prepared for Pete Hegseth. And it actually argued for really pulling back. I don't know if what it said about Israel. I guess, again, maybe they didn't deal with that. They just kind of acknowledged that we're going to, because Israel's Israel, we're just going to continue to support them to the hilt. But it did advocate pulling back both vis-a-vis Russia and China, which is the difference. You've had these people that have said, yeah, this Russia thing isn't working for us. The Russian government did not collapse. It's not going to collapse. That whole thing just didn't work out. The Ukraine project is a failure, but we got to confront the Chinese, in the Western Pacific. But this is arguing, we don't know who's behind it, but that, we need to pull back there and actually focus on the Western Hemisphere. And now we see Venezuela. So maybe, I think it's hard for them to give up on this vision of global hegemony, but the facts are the facts. You only have so many missiles, and at some point, reality just, it starts to impose limits on your actions, and regardless of your ideology. So, we may just see this focus, this retrenchment back to the Western Hemisphere, and it really, I think, is born of the limits of Western power and the rising strength of the other powers. It's just something that, in the end, you can try to ignore it, and you can pursue your propaganda war, and in your information sphere, you're the global hegemon, and nobody can possibly oppose you. But in reality, somebody's got to look in the cupboard and see that it's bare, and that's going to affect your actions. And I think we're starting to see signs of that.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's just going to be a rapid crumbling of the military-industrial complex. This is something I'm curious about as well. Is just who in their right mind would want to purchase U.S. weaponry when, first of all, one, we have an inability to produce at scale, and you can't even get a lot of these weapons anyways, or you're on a backlog for 10 years to get an interceptor for a Patriot system that doesn't work very well. And then there's that huge bill. But then what we saw here in Doha is that maybe they can just shut you off and turn it down. Like you have a security guarantee, and then Israel just bombs you, and then nothing happens. Where's your defense? Where's your protection? And why would you want the U.S. to protect you? And then there's just the taint associated with the United States. Like, I don't want to deal a deal with the U.S. and any military equipment when we see this genocide in Gaza. And then you're just seeing, what China and Russia is able to produce. High quality weapons at scale. You're not going to run out. They're not going to tell you, sorry, you got to wait till next year to get them. Then they're way cheaper. And then you don't have that taint, the fact that they're involved in some type of genocide, and supporting Israel, which is bombing, half of the countries in the Middle East.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah. I don't know how much, these businesses has been affected so far, but I think in the long run, you're probably right.
Right. The only countries that I think will buy it will be, the NATO countries that are forced to buy it until they are we drain them completely, until they fall apart because, okay, you keep on buying our overpriced crap. We'll send you 10 a month of whatever it is. And it doesn't do anything, but it costs you $1 billion each time. It just seems like such a scam, and the poor Europeans are just, I think the problem with the Europeans is just they loved America so much, back in the day, and now that it's kind of gone sour, there's this cognitive dissonance in their mind. I had this experience just because, when I was in college here at UT, I was in the international school, and I had all these European students every year that I was in the international house. I was doing the orientation for international students, all this stuff. And they were just so cool to be in America for them. They're like, oh yeah, just see it on the movies, and now we're at a football game, all this stuff. They loved it. They loved the concept of America and the idea of Americas. I think so many Europeans did, and now it's just, it's just changing that whole perception of the United States. It just takes a little bit of time, but it's happening.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyways, I think we've gone long enough. If there's any final words you have for us?
I think we've covered, there's a lot that happened, and I think we did a pretty good job of covering it. We could actually get back to like what's happening in the battle lines. We could at least touch upon, I don't have a whole lot to say about Nepal, but we could touch upon it. But we can do that some other time. Maybe we'll learn more about what's going on.
Okay.
It would be good to wait a little while.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. All right. Well, my wife is headed to New York for a few days, so I'm going to be alone with the kids. So our schedule might be a little bit rocky the next couple of days. So, we'll try. We might do an episode tomorrow morning before she leaves, or I'll try to do one when, my son's taking a nap or something on Friday. We'll figure it out. So,
good luck.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'll need it. Okay. All right. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot, Dad.
Okay. Bye.